We're joined now by the Competition Commission's Commissioner Tembinkosi Bonakele. Mr. Bonakele, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Sakina, to you and the viewers.
So let's start at the beginning. If you could firstly just explain to us in simple terms what exactly it is that Meta is accused of doing.
So Meta, or Facebook, as we generally know it, through WhatsApp, because they own WhatsApp 100%, they have a platform that is used by businesses. This is what enables businesses to communicate with their clients, or bulk communication services, e-commerce, and some of the data-driven processes. They sell these under normal circumstances to businesses and large organizations. So what this company has done, GovChat, is a private company that then innovated on top of that Facebook technology. In other words, using the data that Facebook has, innovating and created value out of that data. And this is how they did it. They packaged that data, sliced it, and communicated it to citizens, so citizens can easily access it for all sorts of government services. So people who are wanting inquiries about social grants, the 350 that's been rolled out, even things like COVID and so on. Virtually all government services at all levels, municipalities, you can report potholes. So it's a real innovation, but it's sitting on top of a Facebook platform. So what Facebook is doing now, they are saying that they want to remove this company from their platform and they want to take control of their platform so that they can do whatever they want with it. And we're coming and saying that in terms of competition law, the Facebook platform is such an essential good that a dominant firm such as Facebook is not allowed to simply remove and exclude competitors from accessing it. This is really where we come in. So we come in to say, Facebook, you are dominant, and the GovChat cannot easily replicate or obtain a similar facility from elsewhere. So you are an essential facility and you can't exclude them from the market.
You used an interesting word there, saying a competitor. So others might argue that Facebook is entitled to select what it deems suitable to be used or to use on its own platforms. How would you argue against that?
Well, Facebook can select. What it's not allowed to do is to unfairly exclude competitors. So an exclusion that is there for no other reason except to block competition is problematic from a competition point of view. So we know in this instance that there is a lot of monetization of this information. So they are not just removing this company for the sake of it. They are not going to throw away that data. That data is still going to be monetized. It's just that there is this particular company that's being excluded from doing so. And incidentally, that's the company that has innovated and developed this kind of market.
So is this the only company that has been excluded in this way? And do you know whether there is actually precedent of this happening elsewhere in the world?
Actually, we know that these platforms tend to do this, and there are cases elsewhere in the world, in Europe, for example, against Google for self-preferencing. But this is the first in South Africa, and it's fairly unique in the world in the sense that we don't have government services such as GovChat being rolled out in this manner. So it's a precedent, not just for South Africa that we're looking at, but I think that it's going to have international implications. Certainly, it's the first time that Facebook is doing this, and it's the first time that they are being taken on and opposed for doing it.
I mean, and this might be, slightly offline for the discussion that we're talking about regarding the competition issues inherent in this. But why would a government entity, government chat then, be developed in such a way that it is dependent on someone else's platform to exist and operate?
You're asking an essential question, Sakina. These platforms have developed so quickly, but also to be so huge that you can't possibly, even as a government, easily replicate them. So the data that they collect, the data that Facebook collects on us as citizens, as we use WhatsApp, as we use their platform, it's impossible for anybody else to be able to replicate that. That's why, in fact, they are a special breed of companies in the economy, in that they facilitate this exchange of information and essentially also commerce. They are like a highway through which commerce now is going to be traversed. And not everybody is going to be wanting to build their own highways. It's not going to be as easy to build a highway as we know that you have to share the road, and this is what the competition authorities all over the world are concerned about when it comes to digital platforms.
Well, you have to share the road, but surely whoever owns the road has the discretion to decide who gets to use that road and under which terms and conditions, don't they?
Sure, and this is what we're talking about, that here, if you have an essential good like this, there are certain things you can't do. You can't just say, I don't like Sakina, and therefore I'll remove her. So you are bound by certain rules. Now, if you have your own private road in your own private estate, that's a small road, you are allowed to say, you can't walk in my grass, you can't walk in my path. That rule will not apply to you. But once you become so big that you own a highway, then there are special rules that start applying to you. And this is exactly what is happening here, that Facebook and WhatsApp are so dominant that there are special rules of access that apply to them that otherwise would not apply to a small participant in the market.
It's a very interesting argument, because when it comes to the databases that you make reference to, what is stopping government from, starting their own entity, because they have access to our data? You have Home Affairs, you have SARS, you have so many government entities that are sitting there with all of our data. So what's stopping them from creating their own platforms?
It's a good question. I suppose they can always do that. There are many governments that are innovative. GovChat is in itself an innovation. It's such that it is based on a platform that's owned by somebody else. The only point I make here is that you have to decide whether to share the highway or build a separate highway. And sometimes the cost of building a new highway could be so astronomical, and the innovation that's required in this instance may also make it impossible to build an alternative. So maybe it's not as easy as building a road, because a road is an old kind of technology that is being used. Everybody has access to it. But when it comes to monetizing data, not everybody can do that, and at least not to the same extent. So that innovation is also what makes it essential. So it's not just static data. So you may get Home Affairs data, you may get a traffic licensing data, but it's static. But once you start monetizing it, that you start innovating around it, once you start picking up consumer choices, once you start knowing what citizens are worrying about just based on data, then that's different from kind of having an old kind of files at Home Affairs.
But surely algorithms, you could build in certain, aspects into that facility that could give you that sort of information, exactly the same way that Meta and others are collecting that data. But let's park that. What authority does the Competition Commission have over an entity like Meta?
Well, we have jurisdiction over activities that are taking place in South Africa. So this is taking place here. It's affecting our own citizen. And there are provisions in the Competition Act that specifically deal with abuse of dominance, with access to an essential facility. And that's what gives us the power to take up this case.
So let me be facetious. So can SABC then, go and complain about MultiChoice having a monopoly on sports rights so that we can't show certain sporting codes that are in the public interest because we don't have the rights and they do?
Absolutely. In fact, that's a competition issue we have looked at. Sporting rights are essential for broadcasters, and to what extent they can be restricted to one broadcaster is a competition question. Those things are complex in that somebody must pay for sporting rights. So if SABC is not prepared to pay, we have to balance the public interest of showing those games against the need for the sporting body to obtain revenue from whichever broadcaster is prepared to pay. And that's the balancing act that competition authorities and regulators are required to do all the time.
So doesn't the same apply to Meta? Have they not had to have capital outlay so that they could develop those platforms, administer those platforms, and have people keeping things up to date there? Can't they make the same argument?
Absolutely, they could make that, and that is why it's a case that is going to the tribunal for adjudication. I'm not saying there are no arguments that could be made to the contrary. But we think it's a strong case. If you think about it, Sakina, in this case, it's actually not Facebook that has spent money developing this market. GovChat itself has spent a lot of time and money developing this. The issue now is that they have done it on top of a platform that we argue is essential. In other words, we're saying you cannot replicate Facebook. So if you are excluded from innovating on top of it, then you are being excluded from the market completely. So think about it, and it's an ecosystem. It's not just Facebook that has developed it. GovChat itself has contributed. Even government has contributed with its own information and access to citizens. And so it's supposed to work exactly like that, like an ecosystem, so that there's no firm that has a monopoly over that data.
So just finally, you have referred, as you indicated, this case to the Competition Tribunal. So what happens next?
So they have to answer. Typically, they have about a month to answer, but we know that it's a complex case. They probably are going to ask for extensions. And then there's a pre-trial procedures. Again, in a complex case like this, I would imagine that it's going to take at least another 12 months before the case is heard at the Competition Tribunal. They will file their papers, they will defend themselves, and we'll run our case and our evidence and hear what the tribunal says about it.
Well, we await the outcome of that, but thank you so much for your time this morning, Mr. Bonakele, Commissioner at the Competition Commission, talking to us there about this case against the group Meta that, of course, owns the likes of Facebook and WhatsApp, and basically being hauled before the tribunal for anti-competitive behavior, as it were, because of the monopoly that it enjoys and what it has done in offboarding GovChat from its platform. So we'll wait and see how that develops.